Hi, and welcome to the Tattooed Teacher podcast, where we get to know the person behind the professional, going below the surface of what we see. Join with me as I talk with some incredible individuals from around Australia and the globe. My guest on today's episode is Kirstene Ciappara. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Kirstene just as much as I did. Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good ever what time of day it happens to be that you are listening to the Tattooed Teacher podcast. On today's episode, I'm just going to give the KC a quick intro. As a teacher, I should be able to pronounce any number of names, but it's one of those things that I just haven't mastered. So, KC, welcome to the show. How do we actually pronounce your name correctly?
Thank you so much for having me. So my name's actually Kirstene Ciappara, but I always say that my parents just stitched me up because no one could get Kirstene. There's too many. It's very unique in itself, it's actually kind of come together now how I really jam on uniqueness, ironically now. But always felt they stitched me up because no one could ever say it. Too many names that are similar. But when I was at uni games, actually, I had someone who just called me KC, which was my initials. And I was like, that's it. That's a nickname. I'm declaring it. So now I just tell everyone to call me KC.
Hey, that sounds like a plan. Look, often a lot of the time I go with the moniker of PJ because I had, with social media and, the ability for anyone to find you, I had constantly had students trying to track me down.
Right.
So I changed it to PJ, and now in certain friend groups, it's stuck. So
so funny, hey.
So we just go with it and we do what we can. So, but Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Pleasure.
Now, I could give you the LinkedIn bio. I could tell all our listeners that you've done this and you've graduated that and you've accomplished this. But what sort of bio would you give yourself when someone goes, hey, Casey, what are you up to? What do you do? Like, how's life treated you to this point? You've run into an old school friend. What have you been doing for the last 20 years? 15. Well, I'm going to say 15. What have you been doing for the last 15 years? And you go, well, so how would you give that? What's your bio?
Yeah, what's my bio? Great question. Because you're right, you can go down that like LinkedIn sort of generic lingo. I guess naturally I always say that my background's in teaching, and I always go back to saying that as a kid, like I always wanted to be a teacher. I would make my younger brother and my younger cousin attend my fake classes. We had a whiteboard outside. I'd even make them homework, not that they loved that. But there was always a very strong teacher archetype in me. So I'll always identify as a teacher, as an educator. And so naturally, that's what I pursued when I finished school myself. But I was always drawn to schools that were challenging the status quo and doing things differently, which I'm sure we'll get into. And in doing so, I actually rediscovered that there's a very entrepreneurial side to me. And that was pretty present as a kid as well. Wasn't super nurtured when I was at school, just given what was sort of the focus when I was at school. But yes, I would say both a teacher and an entrepreneur.
That's fantastic. And look, they are two amazing skills to have. And you're probably coming right into the peak of benefiting from that skill set.
Yeah.
Both in the teaching area and the entrepreneurial sense, because I guess where we are in society today, you can almost throw out you've got to get this and you've got to do that and you've got to do to be successful. Whereas we see, kids as young as 9 and 10, with their parents' permission, of course, creating these YouTube channels and just making business and making money and being a success. You're doing entrepreneurial stuff, and it's like you're in the prime position. That's where almost anyone with a computer connection and a great idea. And I said, I was talking just before, and we cut out, unfortunately, because of technology. But kids as young as 9 and 10 are creating YouTube channels with permission from their parents, I'm assuming, and being successful.
Yeah. And I think it's like this narrative on how to be successful, like the trajectory you need to go down to be successful. It's changing. And I think, there are still people maybe in education that are gripping to that older narrative or that older pathway or the traditional route to success, but we're seeing so many alternate routes to success. And ultimately, it's my perception, my belief is that the more we can play to our authentic self, our unique design, that's actually going to be what creates success. And for some, that's still absolutely going to be going down that traditional, post-school pathway around like uni and extra study and things like that. But for some people, following their unique, authentic self, their passion and purpose is going to be very much down that entrepreneurial trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of uniqueness, we all have a drive and we all have a reason why we do things. So, what's the why behind what you're doing?
Great question. So when I finished uni, again, I was always kind of drawn to schools that were challenging the status quo and doing things differently. My first school was actually a trade school. So I went to uni for English and PhD at the time, mostly just because I had really great English and PE teachers at school. Knew I wanted to make an impact on young people. That was always a driver for me. But I didn't really love any of my subjects at school. I just kind of got through them, but I'm like, you got to pick something if you're going to teach it. Anyway, went and taught English studies at a trade school. So that was where students from year 11 and year 12 were taking, again, an alternative pathway, not getting an ATAR, but getting still their high school certificate, whilst also completing the first year of their trade or like traineeship. So really loved seeing that connection between school and the workforce. And so I remember thinking, like, when I started there, I'm like, this is amazing. Like, these kids are going to love what they're doing. They're going to be so passionate about their trade. They're already getting a couple of steps ahead. And I would probably say maybe like 40 to 50% of them were like, yeah, this is what I want to do. I'm really excited about this trade pathway. But a huge chunk of them were like, not lit up by it. They just didn't want to do the traditional pathway of uni and whatnot, but their parents were making them stay at school. So they're like, I'll just do a trade. So they were disconnected from what they were doing. It was making it then really hard to try and engage them as a teacher, try and help them find meaning in what they were learning. So I was starting to go through the motions of like, I'm actually not loving what I'm doing for work right now. And I remember it wasn't really the Sunday Arvo dread that a lot of people get or the Sunday scaries. For me, the moment was, it was like a Friday afternoon, 3:00 in the afternoon, bell went, students were leaving. And I just felt so relieved. I was like, thank gosh, that's over. And I mean, I'm sure people can resonate with that. We all have good weeks and bad weeks, even if we're in jobs that we love. But I just remember thinking, this is not okay. I shouldn't be getting to the end of my week and feeling so like relieved that it's over. That's way too much of my week, way too much of my life not to love what I do. So I was
Absolutely.
really starting to have this fire in me, and it was hard because everyone around me was always like, yeah, but that's just work. Like, you know, you're not meant to, like, you can't really love what you do. It's just, you just got to get through it and whatnot. And I was like, no, I refuse to accept that. And so, yeah, I guess that sent me down a trajectory around like wanting to help people design careers that they love. And it actually still led me into a role in education that enables me to do that. But yeah, I would just say the uniqueness piece comes back to often people are feeling stuck in jobs or careers that don't light them up because they're actually out of alignment with their unique, authentic self. So I'd say my driver is helping them understand that so that they can design careers that they love, or more context specific for students so that they can design learning pathways that they love. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I feel like I sort of went sideways and hopefully came back around.
No, that's brilliant because I mean, I've been teaching, like I said earlier, I've been teaching over 20 years now, and every child is unique. And I know those classes, and I've got one of them. And look, some of these lads, they are fantastic young men, and they're going to go on to do amazing things. But they hate school. They're in a trade pathway. They're doing their in school apprenticeship, but they want to leave, and their bosses want them to go full time, but their parents are, like you said, some sort of, they have that mindset of, no, you've got to get your, for New South Wales, you know I've forgotten the terminology
High
now.
school certificate.
The
Yeah,
high
no,
school
the equivalent.
certificate. But up in Queensland now, it's the QCE, so that if you
Yes.
decide that that's not working, you can still get into university. But
Mm,
my thing is, and I come from a trade background, so
mm,
I was school was a social experiment for me.
yeah.
So I was there, I had fun, and I thought I was like, once I left school, that was it. I
Mm,
was out. I was never going back to school again.
mm.
Yeah, and then
But
here
you
I
came
am.
back on your terms, which I think
Well, I think
that's
so. Yeah,
the
I did.
key.
I did. I followed my pathway.
Mm,
That has led me to my success, whatever. And I've learned some amazing things, and I've
mm,
met some amazing people, and had some crazy experiences. But I see these kids who are just sitting in everyone's classroom, and they're just like, I just want to go out and
mm,
work on a car, or build a house, or build that garden and landscape that lawn for someone, and
mm,
do all these things. And I think society is starting to shift slowly,
mm.
but I think schools are shifting even slower,
Yes. Yeah.
because there's this, and I mean, traditions change.
Mm.
It's one of those things, but it just it makes it really difficult. And as you said, you got to the end of the week, and like you're just like, I'm giving too much of my time, and I shouldn't
Mm.
feel like this.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things I look back on now. I'm actually very thankful for the trade school boys that did challenge me, because it was in them challenging me that I started to think, well, what is the purpose of what I'm teaching them? If they can't see the purpose of it, how it's going to help them, how it's going to be relevant to them, then there is a missing link here. So I'm actually almost thankful that they challenged me now. The other thing I was going to say on that is it is like we need to help people understand that and I think there's a big piece around educating parents, and I think that's something that I would love to move into a little bit more, because you could have schools that do help with giving students alternate pathways, or showing them that it's great to follow, your success is going to come from following what really authentically lights you up. But then if they've still got parents that are still doing the best they can with what they know, but still telling them like, no, you've got to stay in school, get this degree, X, Y, and Z, then it's sending them mixed messages. So I think there's a huge piece around needing to educate parents on that as well. And yeah, so I think there's a couple of different influences and pieces that need to come into it. But I speak to quite a few people that have finished school that have either gone into uni and, quote unquote, done that successful traditional pathway, and they still don't know what they want to do, or they've ended up in jobs that they then don't love and don't know how to navigate that. So it's like, and I'm wrestling a lot with the fact that a lot of people are going down that uni pathway or that, job trajectory because they want safety and security, which is a core human need that we have. But it's like, at what point does pursuing a pathway, whether it's study or career, that yes, provides safety and security, be at the detriment to our own well-being and mental health? So it's just, yeah, it's so layered. It's so layered.
Yeah, you've unpacked so many things, and it's all relevant. And I think every teacher who's listening to this, and
Mm,
probably a few parents, are going, exactly.
mm,
That's where our battle lies. Like,
mm.
how do we navigate this? Quite murky waters at time,
Yeah.
um, because it's like, I mean, I've raised three children myself. They're
Mm,
all adults now, and again, and it was quite funny, is because a lot of people go, "But you're a teacher. You love school," and I'm going, "Yeah, but they hate it. So let's find another avenue for them
mm,
to to be successful, and let
mm,
them travel their path." And
mm,
it's a tough thing as a parent to go, okay, yeah, leave school and go
mm.
and do this.
Yeah.
But again, like, I'm nearly 50 years old now,
Mm,
and I'm just like sometimes going, man, I'm still teaching. Wonder what else there is I could do.
yeah.
What
Yeah.
else? Like, am I stuck doing this, or do I want
Mm,
to do this? And I mean,
mm,
I love teaching. I really
mm.
enjoy it. But again, if the right opportunity came up, who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
as a young person, I'm going to
Mm,
say young person because I'm aging myself here. Um, and as a young teacher who has gone, you know what, this is just too difficult. This is
mm,
too much. I want to impact the lives of these young men and women.
mm,
How? how did you transition from that and still engage with them, but you're no longer in the classroom full time?
That's
What's
correct.
happening there? What?
Honestly, a little bit of magic, I still think, to be honest. But if I backwards map now a little bit, so again, we're starting with the trade school. I was loving that connection between school and the workforce. And then just out of my own curiosity, I was like, you know what? I wonder if I could go and like study something with like career development and I didn't really do it with the expectation of, oh, I want to be a careers advisor in a school. There wasn't really a careers advisor within that trade school anyway. And I hadn't really engaged with one when I was at school either. But I'm like, I'm just going to study this because I'm curious about it. And I studied through RMIT in Melbourne, just online. And the very first concept I was introduced to in this grad certificate was the idea of life design, which actually stemmed from Stanford University, underpinned by design thinking. But rather than applying it to a product or a service or an invention, you're applying it to your life. And it was the idea that we are the designers of our life and our career. And I was hook, line, and sinker. I loved the concept. Anyway, I kept studying that whilst teaching at the trade school. And about 6 months later, a girl that I went to high school with who worked in HR for the kind of diocese that I was working at the time, hadn't really spoken to her for a couple of years. She's like, I know, she reached out to me. She's like, hey, Kirstene, I know this is really random, but I've just seen this job role and I thought of you. And it was teacher of life design at a school in the diocese that I was at. 30 minutes, I had no idea. Like, I still say it was the most synchronistic thing to ever happen to me. And so this school, St. Luke's Catholic College, very innovative school, very innovative principal, who had carved out time in the timetable from year 7 through to year 10 for students to do a subject called life design, which at the, I guess, forefront of that was helping them to understand their unique design. So their strengths, their interests, their motivators, then channel that into passion projects, entrepreneurial projects, and then use it to uncover their purpose and use that as a compass for designing their learning, picking their subjects, and then looking beyond to careers. And so I always say it was a subject I was always meant to teach. I loved it. We had the opportunity to collaborate with professional external coaches as well, who like coached the students, coached us, helped us coach the students, brought like frameworks and stuff like that we could work with. And so, yeah, I loved it. And everyone around me knew how lit up I was by it. But there was an echo that I kept hearing. Whenever I'd tell people this is what I did for work, they would always say one of three things. Why don't all schools have this? I wish I had this when I went to school. Can I go back to school and do this? And so hearing that echo, I actually then joined forces with one of those coaches to bring this work to more young people and more schools. So
That's amazing. That sounds fantastic. Now, I know St. Luke's. I'm just trying to, and like I've heard great things about it because I mean I'm born and raised in Sydney. I'm a Bankstown boy.
yeah.
So I'm just trying to picture where St. Luke's actually is because I know there's several of them. But
Yeah, Marsden Park.
yep.
Yeah, Marsden Park. So, and
So
Greg Miller was the like founding principal or like the first principal of the school. So his name might ring a bell.
can I ask what year that was that he had that subject running?
Yeah, so the school started in 2018, I believe. I didn't join until the end of 2020, though. So it was already running for about, 2 to 3 years. I was incrementally building it up. So when I started, it was only at year 9. And then now it's, through the end of year 10, but that cohort has like moved through now. So
That's fantastic. And like as a design teacher, I mean, we talk about design thinking all the time, but it's not just like you said about a product or a service or an environment. It can be put into any aspect, and I think by the sounds of it, this founding principle was probably at the forefront because it's probably only in the last maybe 2 or 3 years really that design thinking has started to make a resurgence, even though it's been around quite a while, especially in the education fields. But to take the risk and carve out valuable curriculum time to something that will actually enhance the rest of their schooling life and their life must have been a big risk for him, but it sounds like it's paying huge dividends.
Yeah, it definitely bold. And again, he was so in his strengths because he's very futuristic, very visionary. So it actually, the more I know him or got to know him, the more I can see this is so like everything he brought forward was just him at his best and him tapping into his unique assets, his unique potential. But yeah, absolutely, still very bold. And there was quite a significant amount of time, still is, carved out for life design within at St. Luke's. It's still your most, I want to say, extreme example, for lack of better words. Other schools we work with are maybe allocating like an hour a week versus like 3 to 4 hours a week. But because they have got so much time within the life design course at St. Luke's, in the later years, they then weave in things like TAFE courses or Certificate 2 or 3 and things. They reworked like D&T as well into it. So very smart use of time, or very innovative use of time, I would say. But yeah, it was the parts around helping the students understand themselves. And I feel like it was, to me, I still can't understand why more teachers don't want to teach it, because at the heart of teaching, it's all about, you need to build relationship with your students. And I was like, that was my job. It was my job to get to know the students and build relationships with them and empower them. Like that was my job as a life design teacher or a life design coach. And yeah, I actually almost just want to make that accessible to more teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I guess I hear, a life design, they've carved out the work, they've carved out the time in the timetable, and it's called life design, and kids are probably rolling their eyes when they first heard it. But because I mean, so many schools run, I guess, pastoral care
Yeah.
lessons, and they have, maybe a similar time, or they run life development courses, and they run, a whole range of different things depending on the school. And the kids sit there, roll their eyes, and go, "Yep, I've just got to get through this."
Yeah.
How engaged were your students in
Yeah.
this life design? Because I mean, teaching empathy, teaching them how to ideate, teaching them how to refine their ideas, how to be creative, in almost it's not the best word, but in a ethereal sense, because it's not tangible, and kids love tangible things.
Yeah. Yeah.
How well did they engage in this course?
Yeah, great question. Super valid question. I guess with St. Luke's, students didn't know any different, because as they entered year 7, it was just part of the culture. So they didn't know any different. So for them, it was like, this is just high school. Some of the other schools we've worked with, again, year 7 are a great space because they're a bit more open-minded, trying to implement it with older year groups, albeit like that's when they're at decision points, which is really effective to have this inside out approach. There is the resistance because it is different. Like suddenly they're coming to school, and rather than learning about contents, things outside of themselves, they're suddenly learning about themselves. And the more I see it is, it's like there needs to be that sense of psychological safety within those life design classes for students to really lean in, because there is a vulnerability that's required in looking at yourself. So there's that piece. If that psychological safety isn't there, the resistance will go up. The other key piece is it is like so imperative that the teacher facilitating it wants to teach it. And I think that is the biggest problem with like external courses or external programs that get brought into schools. It's often something that's just thrown on the teacher's timetable. They haven't opted in. They don't really want to teach it. They're not embodied in the work themselves. And then it's never going to land for the students. So a big learning that we've had as a business, but just, overall, is that for this to be successful, for students to resonate with it, it needs to, like, the teacher needs to lead the way. If it's not aligned with, their passion and purpose, it's almost contradictory for them to be facilitating this. So, yes, the resistance can be there, but what counteracts that is a teacher who is passionate about it and wants to deliver it. And I've had this echo of a couple of different teachers who have loved teaching it that I've worked with. And they're like, oh, I just got a really good class. I go, no, the students are picking up on your enthusiasm and your authenticity, and they're meeting you there. If I guarantee you could have had a challenging class, and it doesn't mean that they still wouldn't have been a little bit, harder to work over, but they're picking up on the energy and the investment that you're bringing into that classroom.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a very relational course. Like if you didn't connect personally with the students on some level.
Mm.
And I mean, I know that you're not going to be able to connect with every single student.
Yeah.
That's, in a perfect world, that would be
Mm.
fantastic.
Mm.
But to connect with most of them, and that's when they can see it, and they're almost willing to be vulnerable. And I mean, I know as an adult, like when you asked to look in at yourself,
Mm.
it's actually quite challenging, and
Yeah.
and and often unsettling.
Mm.
And you mentioned psychological safety. So
Mm.
how how did you balance
Mm.
that? Like trying to get them engaged,
Mm.
trying to build the relationship, but then also making sure that they were safe. Because I'm assuming at times some students may have offered up more of themselves that they might quite guard
Mm.
um, in a public space. And so how do you protect that environment? How do you make that such a
Yeah.
safe space?
It's a good question. I think there's no one size fits all way to do that. I think when I was at St. Luke's teaching it myself, we were 2 to 60, so 2 teachers for every 60 students. So I feel like how I did it was, more sort of like breakout groups and things like that, and so trying to work with students in smaller groups. With other schools that we work with that are like 1 to 28, 1 to 30, again, it's more around, it comes back to those, classroom expectations. And one of the schools we work with have articulated brilliantly. It's like, how do we create this culture of uniqueness? So it's really about, in order to create psychological safety, it's all about really acknowledging, celebrating that we are all unique. And that's an all boys school. So typically in the past, if you're not into footy or you're not interested in footy, then that might mean you're a bit isolated or you're, on the outer in some ways. Whereas by bringing in like this culture of uniqueness that's really weaved in the course, as well as other initiatives that they're doing, then it really creates or compounds that psychological safety. So I think there's those pieces like classroom expectations, as you would with other KLAs. I think breaking the course naturally allows for like small group coaching, one-on-one coaching. So I think it's just, how do you carve out the time and space to do that? There was something else I was going to say on that. Again, it's the teacher leading the way. Like I would often share, if, we're doing an activity around unpacking strengths, I would share my strengths. Or if I was to do it, if the students were doing a passion project, I would do a passion project too and share mine. So I think it's actually modeling it with the students, because not only are you giving them an example of, the standard and what needs to be done, but you're also showing them that it's safe. I'm going to lean into this as well. So yeah, that would be my pieces.
Yeah, it sounds super fun, but super daunting at the same time, because it's just, yeah, like,
Yeah. I
because
don't know,
yeah,
but I guess, yeah, in some ways it is like, and I think it might help if I contextualize it in the sense that understanding yourself or figuring out quote unquote who you are, that is daunting. Like that is scary. And sometimes that's more like, I'm sure other teachers or people listening to it, like, no, just give me a NESA curriculum to work through. Whereas like a framework that underpins the course is what we call the SIM framework. So it kind of makes it simple, creates this sort of whole school language as well. And so really the SIM is both an analogy and an acronym. An analogy because it plays on the fact that everyone's got a unique SIM card in their phone with a unique identifier. That's why you get your phone calls and messages. I get mine. So we take that uniqueness of the SIM, apply it to ourselves. But then it's also an acronym for your strengths, your natural gifts, talents, abilities, your interests, topics, activities that you froth over, that you love, and then motivation, which is your intrinsic drivers, the things that really matter to you. So having that as a like foundational core framework throughout the course, I think it's a great anchor, and it simplifies that, because yes, we are very complex and there are so many things that shape who we are, but it's more about what are some really key, authentic qualities or aspects of us that we can understand and explore and lean into. When it comes into purpose, that is a deeper concept. And I would say that, some students, they're not going to finish the unit with a very crystal clear purpose statement. Some will, but for a lot of them, it's like starting to just ignite that purpose uncovering process versus being like, oh, all my students are going to walk away with a purpose statement at the end of this. No, not going to happen, as much as I would love that. early stages me thought it was possible, but no, it's how do we ignite this process for students, because it's a lifelong process. Like, I'm still coming back to all these things for myself, and I'll continue to come back to them.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a great example to show the students, show these young men and women, um, that it is a lifelong. We need to be lifelong learners. We need to
Yeah.
be rethinking our opinions, rethink our, look at why we believe what we believe, why we understand what we understand. Is it just our parents' thought, or is it our mates, or is it TV? Is it now social media? Is it what are we flooded with? So I
Yeah.
guess it's probably one of those great things where you can go, hey, I haven't got it all together. I don't know
No, it
everything,
does. Yeah.
but I'm trying to constantly learn.
Yeah.
And like on that, in that sort of similar vein, like obviously being St. Luke's, being in Catholic education, I mean, they have a big focus on religious education. I mean, I have my own personal faith as well, but is the religious side or the faith side of Catholicism brought into that, or is that kept separate, or
Um,
is it just sort of, or it allows the students to journey through it without, because I'm assuming there are students who maybe attend mass every week, but there's also students who just show up because that's the school that their parents want them to go to.
Yeah, great question. There was quite a strong like Sikh and Hindu culture around that area. So despite it being a Catholic school, it was there wasn't as much. I feel like there was definitely still, your liturgies and your masses and things like that, but it wasn't as, I guess, I don't want to say heavy in the culture. That's not the right word, but it wasn't as big of the culture compared to maybe other Catholic schools that I'd been at and I'd worked at and went to school myself. So I would say that context maybe has like something to offer there. I would also say there was never really, I guess, explicit links that we were making within the life design course when I was teaching it, even and also now in what we roll out with other schools. I always encourage schools to add their own unique flavor. So if that faith piece is really big for them, we've got a couple of Christian schools that we work with, absolutely, like weaving it in. And I think some pretty like universal links that can be made is if we're looking at how our unique design, well then who is the creator that's uniquely designed us? So that's always a pretty clear link, and that did happen at St. Luke's too. But also when it came to like the purpose piece, like what are you called to do? How are you here to serve others? Like there's a lot of service elements that are weaved into lots of school cultures. So I find that is a way that it kind of really directly connects, and whether that's just a general service culture or more of a like faith-based service, it kind of connects the dots there. So I would say that the course in itself, the concepts that it covers can link to different faith traditions, but it can also be quite secular as well.
Yeah, I guess so. So horses for courses, really. But so it's how, and every school has its own flavour, has its own uniqueness, that can't be replicated. I mean,
No.
schools can be next door to each other and can be completely different. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's good that there's that flexibility there.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I'm an empathetic person. That's just who I am. That's who I've
Yeah.
created to be. That's one of my unique traits. And I teach design, so we talk about empathy, especially in human-centered design or
Yeah.
user-centered design. And a lot of people ask me, can empathy be taught? So I'm gonna throw that question straight to you because that's what you're doing now. So
Yeah.
can empathy be taught to these young children and these young
Such
men and women?
It's so funny how questions come. I've been deep in philosophical thought as of late, around like strengths in particular, because my perspective is that we all have innate talents and gifts, and when we invest in those, they become strengths. And if we can play to our strengths, that's where we're going to create the most success and the most like energy and impact in our life. However, what happens when someone's really strong or naturally gifted in empathy, but then someone isn't? But sometimes situations are going to require empathy, whether you've got the strength for them or not. So I guess the way that I see it is strengths or understanding your gifts and talents are never about understanding, oh, you can do this and you can't do that. It's more about understanding what do you have more of a stamina threshold for. People who are naturally, I guess, gifted or talented in empathy or relationship building strengths, they're just going to have a lot more stamina and they're going to get a lot more energy from being empathetic and, you know, leaning into that. Whereas someone else who maybe doesn't have, it doesn't come as naturally, doesn't mean that they can't be empathetic, doesn't mean that they can't learn it and still develop it to a certain degree, but it's just like their threshold for it might be little. So it's like people like that, you're probably not going to be wanting to be in jobs or careers that require high empathy if it's not something that comes as naturally to you. It can be learned, but what I will throw in actually, I digress a little bit, but it will come full circle. Strengths-based approach. There was a really interesting study done back in the 1950s in Nebraska. It's kind of what started the strengths-based movement. They took two groups of readers in year 10. So one were naturally talented readers, and then one were like sort of weak or average readers. And so what they did is they tested them on their speed reading. And I think it was like the talented group got about 300 words per minute. The weak or average group got about 150 words per minute. Both groups got the same level of coaching and training and development, but the returns were significantly higher for those that were naturally talented. There was improvements. The weak or average readers went from 150 words to about 300 per minute. So there was improvement. There was the ability to still learn and develop a skill. But then the talented group went from like 300 to like something like 2,000, 2,500. I can send through the study.
Wow.
So it's just insane. And so what it shows with the strengths-based approach is that you want to invest in your strengths and maybe manage, I don't want to say areas of weakness, but areas that you're not naturally talented in. So I think to come full circle back to the empathy thing, I believe that we've all got the ability to learn skills. It's just about strengths come back to what do we have more of a bigger bandwidth, a bigger threshold for. We're designed to play into that. That would probably be my full circle answer to that. Oh, actually, and one other thing is sometimes we can use our strengths to achieve an outcome. So for me, I actually always describe myself as empathy doesn't come as naturally to me, but I'm very enthusiastic. So sometimes my way of being empathetic or empathizing or helping someone in that situation is to lean into my enthusiasm in some way. That's just an example. So hopefully that answers it.
Well, I mean, I'd love to get a copy or a link to that study, and I'll throw it in the show notes as well if we get a hold of it. That's fine. And you're right. I mean, you hear of so many of these businessmen, entrepreneurs, highly what society deems as successful, where they go, I don't focus on my weaknesses. I get for things that I'm not good at. I find people who are
100%. Yes,
I focus on what I can do well, and I rather than wasting and they've said it, rather than wasting my time and my energy trying to improve something that I'm not good at, I use my time to focus and improve the things that I am good at. So
absolutely,
it's amazing, and trying to get that across to kids must be a bit of a challenge as well.
Sometimes I feel like there's almost a sense of relief though, that like really the strengths-based approach should give you a sense of like, oh, like a sigh of relief, like I don't have to be like everyone else. Like, and again, this is still a bit of a cultural shift, despite having great examples like that. There is this almost focus. I think sometimes this is perpetuated in schools, if I'm being honest, that we want to be good at everything or we want to be well-rounded individuals. And it's actually like, how can we create well-rounded teams where each person can play to their strengths rather than trying to make someone be all the things all the time? So I'm so glad you pointed that out, because the partnership or the strengths-based team, like you can have a well-rounded team. You want a well-rounded team so then each person can play to their strengths. But I think as a society, we're kind of obsessed with trying to be all the things. But also some strengths are almost paradoxical as well. So it's like the other example I use around the empathy piece is because my business partner, he is high in empathy. But then depending on the tool that we use, like I'm high in activator. So it's like if sometimes some situations are going to require that empathy, someone for you to hold space for them, make them feel seen and supported. Other times they're going to require you to kind of initiate them and like get them moving, which is much more to my character and my strength. So it's like, if I tried to be all the things, I'd actually be diluting who I am. And if he tried to be all the things that I was, and he'd be diluting who he was. So there's heaps of perspectives I've got on it, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I want people to work for their strengths, and like I teach kids, and I try and get them to improve areas that they need to improve. But I tell you what, if I have a heart attack and I need a heart surgeon, I want him to know the heart. I don't want him to know the whole body. I want him to know how to fix my heart.
Yes, that's a great way of looking at it. I love that.
And that's what we need to look at. Like I'm a specialist design and technology teacher. Most teachers out there, as you know, have 2, maybe 3 different subject areas.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough just to be able to focus on, in New South Wales, it's called TAS, so Technology and Applied Subjects. So it's it covers quite a wide range, but it's a focused area.
Yeah.
So, and I'm good at it. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'm naturally gifted at it. And the things that I don't do so well, I try and avoid.
Yeah.
To work on the things that I can do well, and if I have to work on them, I try and do it at I get through, but I let people know as well. Hey, I'm not the best at this.
Yeah.
I can get by, but I tell you what, I wish you had. Even now. So at school, as an example, I've got one class I'm teaching engineering for year 10.
Yeah.
They're about to trip over to year 11. And they're going, "Are we getting you next year, sir?" And I've just gone, I certainly hope not, because the other teacher loves engineering, is far better at it, and is excited by it. So I hope you get him, because I'd rather teach you about this. So, and they're like,
so
really?
Yeah. It's like, I actually believe we live in a win-win. Like it gets to be a win-win if, rather than us trying to like force ourselves to work in a way that's not conducive to our unique gifts, our unique talents, we can partner with people who that lights them up, and that's what's going to create the best outcome. Only recently, we needed to get our student workbooks redesigned and rebranded, and I am not a maker. I'm not great with detail orientation, with aesthetics and things like that. Conceptually, I can think it through and come up with the process and all that, but I can't make it look pretty, and I can't make it look aesthetic, and the quality of it doesn't look as good if the aesthetic isn't there. But we enlisted a graphic designer, a branding expert to do that, who is very high in those strengths, and it was a dream. We were a dream duo to work with, because she could play to her strengths, I could play to mine. I could pick up on the concept things that need to change within the workbook. She could make it look so much more aesthetic and beautiful than what I could. So it was a win-win. And she loved the project. I loved being able to work with someone and not have to play to my weakness. So it's a win-win.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what we do. We try and find those.
Yeah.
And as we get older and we realise this. And I think that's where we play to. So, no, I'm not gonna break myself, and I'm not gonna put myself in too much stress. I'm gonna find someone who can do it to enhance what I know needs to be done. Because I'm sure you probably explained to the designer, you gave her your initial thoughts. Again, we'll go back to design thinking.
Yeah.
You had your idea. You defined what the idea was. She started to ideate, and then you came back and you talked it and you evaluated, and then she went back. And so as a team, you came up with the best possible outcome. So
exactly. And very organically, she said to me, "Oh, your communication is so great, Casey." And that is a strength of mine. So it's like you're dropping into your strengths and you're using them to propel projects as well. But again, if I was working in isolation, working on myself, trying to do something that I'm actually not that great at, I wouldn't have had a platform for being able to then share my strengths or use it in that dynamic. So the other thing I do want to add on that, and it's something that I've been sitting with, because sometimes you can't just outsource everything, particularly as a business owner, particularly in life. And so the other sort of workaround I love for that is, again, just having the awareness of who you are means that you can have compassion for yourself when you're having to, like, if you're still having to do something that's out of your strengths, at least you can have that compassion and be like, all right, I'm understanding why this is feeling so hard and heavy right now, because it actually just doesn't align with my unique self. But if I've still got to do it and I can't, outsource it, or I can't delegate it, two little things that I like to think of is, how can I either simplify it or how can I automate it? You might like the automate one being technology, but my example that I like is, I don't like to cook. I really don't like cooking. It's not an interest of mine. I'm not very good at it. You ask my family, they'll tell you the same. But I guess what I've learned to do that works for me is, how can I cook something that is simple, that I can, a bit boring, I can eat the same thing every day, that I can, bulk prep and it's done, but it's an easy meal prep. And I'm like, okay, for me that works. Like, I don't like cooking, but it's something I'm going to have to do regardless. How do I simplify it? Or in other cases, how could I automate it? Sometimes I delegate it. I'll just go to a cafe. But for the most part, there are those other, I guess, strategies that we can leverage if something isn't aligned with our sim or who we are, because it's going to come up.
Absolutely. Hey, well, a tip for cooking. I mean, I love to cook. Like, don't get me wrong, I love it. And when I've got the time, I'll do some extravagant things. But I tell you what, a tip for you: 4 ingredients. Those cookbooks, they're fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds like right up my alley.
Have a look, and
it.
you've got 4 main ingredients. You've got your staples in the cupboard, but 4 main ingredients, and you can do some amazing things. So
interesting. That's a good tip. I do like that. I'm going to have to write that down. Either that or marry someone that's a good cook. Noted. Amazing.
Absolutely. Hey,
amazing.
Now, we've talked about design thinking and students and schools, but you're not in a school. You're not a teacher as such.
No.
So, what are you doing?
Good question. So I have co-founded an education business called MyDesign Education. And so we work with schools, or we partner with schools, partner with educators to bring this intentional self-discovery and career design to their school environment. For our more extensive partnerships, and we've learned very quickly that this is for some schools, but it's also not for other schools, is we work with them to embed the My Design course, or like a similar type of life design course. So start with their year 7s and then build up from there. So create all the content and train up the teachers. So it's kind of like a bit of a train the trainer model. But then for schools that don't have the time or the investment for the sort of full course, then we work with them more through workshops and things like that. So workshops more around like decision points for students, because that was one thing I was hesitant about, is you can have a great workshop come into a school, but then after the workshop's done, like nothing happens with it. So we've always tried to be quite strategic with when we do workshops, so we can ensure that it's not just a one-day thing, but it's something students can then use to decide on their electives or decide on their senior subjects, whatever it might be, or like decide on post-school pathways. So work with schools versus in schools at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm hearing more and more of that. Like, I know some other people who have started, their educational businesses. Not the same as yours, but they're working in the school environment, and more and more the discussion is about, I don't want to work at the school. I want to work with the school. I'm more than happy to come in. And if your school is just, I'm in for a day or an hour or whatever it is, and blow back out again, and just, I'm happy to do that. But I would much prefer to work with the school over X amount of time, so that you get the most benefit out of that. And I think that sounds like, and your company, it's MyDesign?
MyDesign Education, yeah.
And is trying to do that because it's about the best interest and the growth and the success of these the next generation, the future leaders of our society.
Totally. So yeah, I do love it, and I think we've learned a lot in the past couple of years around like how to ensure that programs are set up for success in schools. And I had the privilege, when I stepped away from St. Luke's, I actually worked for Nick Dyson at Future Anything for just under a year as well. I know she's like very big in Queensland, very big across Australia, but in particular in Queensland. And yeah, I just learned so much from her around how to ensure that programs are set up for success in school. Again, obviously different objectives and whatnot, but I think she's leading the way on that front. And I definitely had the privilege of working alongside and learning from her, so that really helped.
Yeah, I see some of the stuff that that they do, and it's fantastic. And again, her passion comes through, and just as we're seeing your passion and hearing your passion come through, and I think that's probably the greatest part to success is that you've found something that drives you, and it's I guess it's that it's almost a selfless selfishness because you're giving so much of yourself for the success of the students, but you gain so much out of seeing the successes of the students.
Totally. And being in alignment with my authentic self. Like, that's my view, is that when we're in alignment with our authentic self, not only are we going to be at our highest joy, but that's when we can actually be of our highest service to other people and contribute the most to people, places, environments that we're in. So again, like win-win, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, well, Casey, Kirstene Ciappara.
You got it. Nailed
There
it.
we go.
Nailed
There we
it.
go. Hanging out. Well, my father-in-law is Sicilian, so I should be able to pronounce it.
Sorry, you did very well. Very
but,
well.
but Kirstene, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you, and I want to value your time because while I'm up here on Queensland doesn't believe in daylight saving. Don't get me started on that one. But it's it's a school night and it's getting a little bit late, and I appreciate your time, and I value your time. But just before we finish up, I just want to ask you just a few more questions,
Go for
just
it.
to round off this amazing conversation.
Awesome.
And the first one is, what is a challenge that you want to put out to our listeners?
Oh, the first thing that's come to mind, and I'm a big believer in just going with that first thought that comes through, is I would challenge your listeners to get across their strengths or take the time to understand their strengths. A couple of ways that they can do that. Easiest trick in the book is ask people that know you well, what do you think my strengths are? Because it's often other people that will be able to pull out your strengths or reflect them back to you. Some other great tools, Clifton's Strengths is, I think, and like leading the way when it comes to helping adults understand their strengths. Or, just come book us for a workshop and we'll take you through our tool. But yes, get to know your strengths. It's a game changer.
Oh, definitely. And I'll make sure I put a link to your webpage in the show notes, that's for sure. The next question I have is there a quote, a mantra, just something that you have held on to or that helps you just get through things? Everyone, there's so many out there, but is there something that you hold fast to, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I was always quite drawn to quotes, even like growing up, and words of affirmation are definitely my love language, so it makes sense. But kind of any to do with like the power of being your unique, authentic self is the ones that really resonate with me. There's one that I know I've got saved for a workshop I'm doing tomorrow, but by Eckhart Tolle, and if I paraphrase it, it's around not trying to be good, but allowing the goodness within you to emerge. And I'm like, oh, that says it all, because I think we can get really caught up in trying to be good, trying to do all the things, but it's like, hold on a minute, we've already got that goodness within us. We need to share that because no one else can share it in the way that we can. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. I'll have to look that one up.
I'll send it across to you. Because it's very beautiful.
Now, it wouldn't be the Tattoo Teacher podcast without asking you, do you have any tattoos?
Oh, I actually do have a few tattoos. Yes, I've got 1, 2, and I think 3, 4 tattoos. So I don't know if I can show you this one. This is probably my favorite one. I've sometimes got to cover it up when I go to schools because I don't know how they'll go with it. But it's kind of it's a butterfly, but it's like 2 faces. So it's meant to mean like the balance between feminine and masculine energy, being and doing, but also butterfly being transformation. So that's that one. But there's a couple of others as well, but I've got time. There's meaning for all of them. I always get some type of meaning, so.
Oh, absolutely. Well, look, yeah. As you know, I've got several.
Yes.
And yeah, like I said, every one of my tattoos has some meaning.
Yeah.
There's none of those. Oh, geez, I
Yeah.
regret getting that one
Yeah.
after that night. So yeah, all mine.
I have a question. Do you feel like, I mean, maybe not the school you work with, but how do schools go with the tattoos, or like do you find that they're more conservative, less conservative than they used to be?
Look, some schools are getting more relaxed with them, but there are definitely still schools and that you have to have them covered up. Like
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. So,
Yeah.
with the exception of my wedding finger,
Yeah.
my ring finger, every tattoo can actually be covered up by
Yeah.
clothing. So,
Yeah. Right.
I've got to, it's one of those things. And like in
Yeah.
Sydney, the schools that I worked at there, I had to have business attire. So I was in a
Yeah.
collar and tie.
Yeah.
None of the tattoos showed.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
Yeah.
some are more relaxed. The current schools that I'm
Yeah.
at the school that I'm at the moment is more than happy for me to have them on display.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
but another school that I was at when I first moved to the Gold Coast,
Yeah.
I had to have them completely covered.
Yeah.
Which working up in Queensland in the middle of summer,
I was going to say, yeah, not not easy. Oh,
but again, they're like for you, they have meaning and they're a reflection
yeah.
of you. So it's not necessarily they have to be on display. It's something that
No.
I do, and it's a personal thing.
Yeah, it's such a cool quirk, such a unique quirk. I think it's awesome.
And it's a bit of my self expression, my uniqueness.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's very on brand. I love it. I love it.
Hey, and last but certainly not least, if people want to find out more about you or get in contact with you and about what you do and the workshops that you run, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, awesome. Definitely LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there nowadays. So Kirstene Ciappara, but MyDesign Education. If you search that on LinkedIn or search it on Google, then our website will come up. But I can send it across, and I'm going to put it in the show notes. Then check it out.
I would definitely put the link in the show notes.
Amazing.
But
Great.
Kirstene, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for what you're doing for the children of the future, these young men and women, and for drawing out. And I think what is so important in today is drawing out the uniqueness of each individual that you come in contact with.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Thanks for just creating such an organic and comfortable conversation. I loved it.
It was heaps of fun. So, well, hey, maybe
Amazing.
in the future we'll do it again.
Sounds good. Sign me up. Love it.
All right, fantastic. Well, you enjoy the
Thanks.
rest of your evening. Good luck with the workshop tomorrow,
Thank
and
you.
and we'll talk again real soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Phil. Really appreciate it. Love your
You're
work.
very welcome. Cheers.
Awesome. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, it would mean so much to me if you could either like, follow, and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening on. The music was by DJ Fruit Salad. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool. Be blessed.